The moment my father's trembling hand hovered over the signature line, I knew my stepmother had finally cornered him. I'm Olivia, his daughter, watching the man I love most about to hand over everything to someone who never truly cared. I had to act, but would anyone believe me? What would you do if your parent trusted the wrong person? Share your thoughts below. I really want to hear them. The house had grown strangely quiet since my father's health began to fail. The old farmhouse on the edge of town, once full of his voice and presence, now echoed only with the sound of the wind against the shutters and the low hum of the furnace. I moved softly down the hall that evening, a tray of tea in my hands, trying to avoid the creaks in the wooden floor. Through the half-open door of the study, I caught sight of Linda, my stepmother, crouched in front of the safe that had always belonged solely to my father. For as long as I could remember, the combination to that safe was his secret. When he remarried Linda 10 years ago, I noticed immediately how quickly she attached herself to every detail of his life, including the family's finances. I had dismissed it back then as the behavior of a new wife eager to prove her worth. But now, with my father weakened and often confined to bed, it was she who carried the keys, she who shuffled the papers, she who whispered into his ear before he made any decision. I stepped closer and cleared my throat. Linda startled, then straightened up, holding a small notebook and the heavy key ring that used to hang from my father's belt. "Olivia," she said smoothly, as if she had nothing to hide, "you scared me." I glanced at the safe. The dial gleamed in the lamplight, and I noticed something odd. The combination lock had been reset. "That's not the old code," I murmured before I could stop myself. She tilted her head, her blonde hair falling neatly over one shoulder, and gave me a smile too rehearsed to be sincere. "Your father asked me to change it. He said it's better this way. Less for him to worry about." She tucked the notebook under her arm and reached for the keyring. "You know how fragile he's become. I'm only trying to keep things in order." My pulse quickened, but I forced a calm expression. "I didn't realize he wanted someone else to manage it," I said carefully. "He's always been so private with his papers." Linda stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You should worry about your patients at the clinic, Olivia, not about ledgers and deeds. I'll handle all of this." She pressed the safe door shut with a firm hand and slipped the keyring into her pocket. I wanted to protest, to tell her that the clinic wasn't my whole life, that the land, the house, and the farm records mattered to me too, because they were part of my father. But the image of him upstairs, coughing and too weak to rise, flashed in my mind. For now, I had to stay composed. Linda reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a small brass key, holding it between two fingers as though she were displaying a prize. "From this day forward," she declared, her eyes gleaming with triumph, "everything goes through me. Your father has entrusted me with the responsibility. I expect you to respect that." I clenched my fists at my sides, hiding them in the folds of my skirt. There was something final in the way she said it, as if a door had closed between me and my father's affairs forever. Yet I knew better than to argue. In that moment, I only nodded slightly and murmured, "If that's what he wants." Behind us, a faint sound drifted from the stairs. I turned and saw my father, Michael, leaning heavily on the banister. His frame, once broad and commanding, now looked diminished, as if the weight of illness had carved away his strength. He met my eyes for a fleeting second before shifting his gaze to Linda. She moved quickly to his side, tucking the brass key into her pocket as she slipped her arm around him. "Everything's fine, Michael," she said sweetly. "You don't need to worry. I'll take care of it." He gave a slow, weak nod, his lips pressed together in silence. That small gesture, that mute approval, struck me harder than any words could. It was as though he had surrendered the very core of our family to her. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to cry. This was not the moment to reveal my alarm. Instead, I smiled faintly and stepped aside to let them pass. Linda guided him back toward the bedroom, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder, the keys jingling softly in her pocket. When they disappeared down the hall, I remained standing in the study, staring at the locked safe. The brass gleam of the new combination dial glared at me like an accusation. My father had once said, "Trust is a heavier key than any safe can hold." Tonight, those words felt distant, unreachable, locked away with everything else Linda now controlled. In that silence, I promised myself I would find a way to uncover the truth behind her intentions. For now, I tucked the promise deep inside, knowing the battle had only just begun. The dining room looked like a courtroom that had misplaced its judge. A long mahogany table ran from the picture window to the fireplace, candles set at precise intervals like evidence markers. China gleamed, silver chimed, and beneath the polite clatter a current of accusation moved from chair to chair. Linda had arranged the seating. Of course she had. She took the head nearest the kitchen, so every dish and every glance flowed through her. I sat halfway down on the left, facing my brother. David avoided my eyes, folding his napkin the way he used to fold paper airplanes as a boy, careful, focused, somewhere else entirely. At the opposite end sat Aunt Grace, our eldest aunt and the quiet arbiter of family manners. Most Sundays, Grace's soft, "let's all breathe," could disperse any squall. Tonight, even she seemed braced for weather. "Before we start," Linda said, rising just enough that her pearls caught the candlelight, "I want to thank everyone for coming on such short notice. Your father is resting. He asked me to pass along his love and his trust." She let the words linger. His love, his trust. Like a hand placed firmly on a door. Trust. The echo of the safe's new combination dial clicked in my head. The code had changed. The orbit of our house had shifted with it. Bowls and platters began their circuit. Linda ladled stew for me, and her smile arrived a heartbeat late. "Olivia," she said, "you look tired. The clinic must be keeping you very busy." "It does," I answered steady. "But I'm glad to be here." "Of course." She set the ladle down with a small, wet thud. "Family is everything, especially when there are decisions to be made." Aunt Grace lifted her water glass. "Let's eat while it's hot," she said gently. But the word decisions had already slipped under plates and into ears. Cousin Nathan cleared his throat. Someone at the far end whispered, then pretended to cough. David's knife tapped twice against porcelain, a nervous metronome. Linda passed the bread and lowered her voice just enough to feign discretion while ensuring everyone could hear. "You know," she said, eyes on the loaf, not on me, "people can misunderstand when a child shows sudden interest in ledgers and deeds. They might think the child is anxious about money." A hush fell. The candles wavered as if the house itself had exhaled. "I'm anxious about father," I said evenly, lifting my glass to hide my tremor. "I'd like him not to worry." Linda offered a sympathetic tilt of her head. "That's why I've taken steps." She tapped her pocket where I knew keys lived. "He needs one voice coordinating everything. It's so easy for paperwork to get lost." The room rearranged itself around that word, lost. Someone murmured to someone else, forks paused midair. I saw it happen as if I were standing outside my own body, a story beginning to form, the same way a storm begins with a single cloud. The safe is locked. The stepdaughter asks questions. The stepmother protects. Choose your narrator and the ending writes itself. Grace set down her glass. "Let's not assign motives," she said, the peacemaker's tone steady. "Michael has always been clear. We respect that." "Exactly," Linda replied, the silk returning to her voice. "Michael has been clear. He wants to simplify. He doesn't want confusion. Or, God forbid, conflict." She looked at me then, openly. "None of us do." I folded my napkin. "Then transparency helps," I said. "We can share the plan." Across the table, David finally looked up. For a second, I saw our childhood. Summer mud on his knees, a slingshot in his pocket. The boy who once swore he'd never let anyone push me around. Then, his gaze slid to Linda, to the keys, to the space in the conversation where our father's voice used to be. He swallowed and looked back down. Linda reached into the center for the candlestick and shifted it slightly, as though aligning a compass. Michael intends to ensure the family funds are managed by the person most capable, she said. The person who has proved over time that she is reliable. The word hung there, sticky as syrup. Reliable. A word that wears pearls and keeps a ledger in pencil. Reliable how? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. By locking safes? By closing doors? Her smile widened a fraction. By making sure no one mistakes affection for entitlement. A soft, collective inhale traveled the table. I held my breath against the sting. If I flinch now, the narrative would harden like plaster. I'm not entitled to anything I haven't earned, I said. I am entitled to the truth. Linda dabbed her lip with her napkin. The truth, she repeated, like a hostess offering a refill. Here is the truth. Your father is reviewing the trusts. He will transition control to the person he believes can shoulder it without drama. She let her gaze pass over the guests before settling on me. He has asked me to prepare that transition. At the far end, someone whispered, "Well, that's sensible." And another voice answered, "Keeps it in the right hands." Sensible bled into sensible, and right hands multiplied into a rumor. The stepmother is fixing what the stepdaughter might complicate. I tasted metal. I forced a sip of water. When will we hear from him directly? I said. When he's strong enough, Linda replied. In the meantime, I'll communicate on his behalf. That's what love looks like when times are hard. Grace's chair scraped softly. Let's finish dinner, she said, tighter now. We'll speak again when Michael is ready. Plates resumed their cautious journey. The room released a little, but not for me. As talk turned to weather and church and someone's new truck, the story Linda had planted unfurled its roots beneath the tablecloth, reaching outward. I could already imagine it crossing the fence line into town, that I'd come sniffing for money, that Linda had protected my father, that I'd made things difficult. I glanced at David. He rolled his fork between his fingers, eyes fixed on the table. When he finally lifted his head, his expression was careful, apologetic, the look of someone deciding which bridge to keep. Maybe, he said softly enough for only me to hear, maybe this is for the best, for now. My chest went cold. I nodded as if I agreed, as if the trial we were sitting through required no defense. Around us, conversation swelled and then thinned to a murmur. Linda refilled glasses, smiling, a priestess of order. At her hip, the keys gave a small, satisfied jingle, and the verdict of the evening, unspoken but perfectly clear, settled over the table like dust. The living room had been rearranged to resemble a boardroom, though the curtains were still floral and the armchairs sagged with age. Father sat in his favorite recliner near the window, a plaid blanket drawn up over his legs, his skin almost translucent against the wool. Linda had placed a silver tray with water and tea in front of him, and beside it a slim stack of folders tied with a ribbon the color of midnight. Bell, the family lawyer, stood by the fireplace with his briefcase. He was polite, neutral, the sort of man who had spent decades balancing his voice between comfort and caution. When he adjusted his glasses, I knew we were not about to discuss something casual. Linda cleared her throat with the importance of an MC. Michael, she said sweetly, I know paperwork tires you. That's why I've taken the liberty of organizing everything. Belle will help us finish what needs to be done. David sat stiffly on the sofa, his knee bouncing under his palm. He glanced at me once, then away, the way someone looks at a train passing by too fast to board. Belle set a folder on the coffee table. Mr. Harris, he began, this is a durable power of attorney. It authorizes one person to make financial decisions on your behalf. Without limitation. Without limitation. The words clanged like a dropped tool. Linda leaned forward, her pearls catching the lamplight. This is to ease your burden, Michael. You need peace. No more worries about bills or deeds. I will carry them for you. She slid the pen across the table as if it were a dessert fork. I leaned in, voice steady but sharp. Dad, you don't have to sign this. You can delegate parts of responsibility, medical, banking, routine errands. But this, I tapped the folder, hands over everything. It removes your children from the equation. Linda's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed. Olivia, you've always been ambitious, but this is not about you. This is about protecting your father. Bell cleared his throat, uncomfortable. To be clear, Mrs. Harris, the document, as drafted, does indeed supersede the children's rights to manage or inherit. Once executed, Olivia and David would have no standing in financial matters. Only the named attorney in fact, in this case, you. The silence was thick, broken only by the soft wheeze of Father's breath. My pulse roared in my ears. Dad, I said, kneeling so my eyes met his. Please don't do this. You've always told me that legacy is about family, about keeping it together. If you sign, you erase us from the future you worked for. His hand trembled on the armrest. The pen lay between his fingers, heavy, awkward. Linda's voice dropped into a low hum, coaxing. Michael, you can trust me. You've seen how Olivia questions everything, how David hesitates. They will argue, delay, complicate. I will simplify. One signature, and it's done. David shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should wait, he muttered. But the words carried no weight. They hung in the air like a paper kite with no wind. I pressed harder. You taught me to read contracts, line by line, to never sign what you don't understand. Look at the clause, Dad. It says irrevocable. Once you write your name, it's not just help. It's surrender. Bell, perhaps sensing the room's fracture, adjusted his tie. Mr. Harris, I must advise you fully. This document, once executed, gives Mrs. Harris sole control. Your children would have no authority to contest or intervene. That is the legal effect. Father's eyes fluttered closed, his lips pale. He raised his hand slowly, the pen wobbling as if too heavy to lift. My breath caught. Linda slid the folder closer, her hand brushing his. Sign, my love, she whispered like a lullaby. And rest. Let me handle the storm. The pen hovered above the page. My own hand twitched, wanting to snatch it, to fling the papers into the fire. Instead, I held my ground, my voice breaking but strong enough to cut through. If you sign this, you sign away your children. The moment stretched, taut as wire. Father's hand shook violently, the nib grazing the paper but not yet pressing down. And then, just as Bell shifted his weight, just as Linda leaned closer, the cliff came. Father's wrist buckled, the pen dropping a small black dot onto the page. His hand hovered trembling, ready to descend. I gasped, my chest tightening with panic. This was the edge, the stroke that could erase us forever. The key was small and brass, its teeth worn smooth with time. Aunt Grace had pressed it into my palm that morning with a look that needed no explanation. Your father trusted only a few places, she'd said. I knew instantly what she meant. The attic trunk, the one no one had opened in years. That evening I slipped into the attic while the rest of the house simmered with Linda's presence. Dust motes drifted in the single beam of light from the cracked window. The air was thick with cedar and neglect. The silence, punctuated only by the creak of the wooden floorboards beneath my shoes. The trunk stood beneath the rafters, its leather edges cracked, the lock still stubborn despite the key's reluctant twist. When it finally gave way, a smell of old paper and iron spilled out. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid and saw stacks of folders. Envelopes brittle at the edges, ledgers bound with string. I pulled out a thick ledger first. Inside were records of household expenses dating back decades, my father's tidy handwriting marching in rows of ink. Each entry was meticulous, every coin accounted for. Then, tucked between the pages, I found a folded sheet in my mother's script. Lists of purchases, notes about debts repaid quietly, details of land taxes she tracked separately from my father's knowledge. The deeper I went, the more the narrative formed. Contracts partially signed but never filed. Receipts showing land transfers that Linda had never mentioned to Belle or David. Each discovery tightened the coil of dread in my chest. Then, at the very bottom, I found it. A folder marked with my father's initials. The ink faded, but legible. Inside was a draft agreement, unfinished, with annotations scribbled in the margins. A line leapt out at me, sharp as a blade. Do not allow Linda access to the land trust. The words were underlined twice, as if my father knew that someday someone might try to twist his intentions. I sat back on my heels, the paper shaking in my grip. For weeks, Linda had argued that everything she did was for Dad's sake. Yet here, in his own hand, was evidence he feared her involvement, that he had written a direct warning to keep her away from what truly mattered. His land. His legacy. My pulse hammered as I scanned the rest of the folder. There were notes about boundaries of the property, mentions of additional codicils Belle had yet to reveal, and calculations that matched the missing sums Linda had claimed were reallocated. The truth wasn't just in rumors or my suspicions, it was in black ink, right here in front of me. I knew the danger of discovery. If Linda caught me with these, she twisted the story before I had a chance to breathe. Quietly, I folded the pages, tucking them into the lining of my coat. The rustle of paper sounded louder than thunder in the empty attic. The floor creaked. For a second, I froze, certain someone had followed me. But the silence returned, and the only sound was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I closed the trunk, locked it again, and slid the key back into my pocket. With the documents hidden against my side, I whispered to myself, "This changes everything." I climbed down from the attic stairs, the house dim and cold around me. In my coat pocket, the papers felt heavier than gold. I didn't know yet how or when to use them, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. For the first time, I had something Linda couldn't spin, couldn't erase, couldn't destroy. And as I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, I pressed the pocket shut with my palm, sealing the evidence against my body like a secret heartbeat. The office smelled faintly of polished oak and old leather, the kind of space designed to intimidate. Shelves of law books lined the walls, their spines like sentinels. I sat across from Linda and David, my hands clenched in my lap to keep them from trembling. My father, Michael, slumped in his chair beside Linda, pale but dressed carefully as if the occasion demanded ceremony. Belle, the family's lawyer, arranged a neat stack of papers on the broad mahogany desk. "This meeting is for clarity," Belle began, his voice steady. "There have been questions raised about the estate. Today we address them." Linda leaned forward, her manicured hands folded gracefully. "Clarity is exactly what we need," she said. "The family has been burdened with doubt because of Olivia's suspicions. It's important we resolve who is truly meant to inherit and manage the trust." Her words dripped with honey, but her eyes never softened. I kept mine locked on Belle, willing him to see through her performance. David shifted uncomfortably beside her, his gaze flicking between me and Linda like a boy forced to choose sides in a schoolyard fight. He didn't meet my eyes. Belle tapped his papers. "There is an official will," he said, "but I should make clear there may be an additional codicil not yet entered into the public record." Linda's head snapped around. "Codicil?" she repeated, a sharp edge cutting through her polished tone. "You've never mentioned this before." "That's because," Belle replied evenly, "it hasn't been validated. But your husband did draft one, Mrs. Harris. It appears he intended to supplement, not erase." I felt a flicker of heat in my chest, like the first spark catching dry tinder. The papers I'd hidden upstairs, my father's own notes, his warning never to let Linda touch the land trust, they connected to this. For the first time, the ground beneath Linda shifted, but she recovered quickly, lips curving in a thin smile. "Drafts mean nothing without signatures. And my husband's condition now, well, he is hardly fit to clarify, is he?" She patted Michael's hand as though caring for him. His weary eyes drifted toward me. And for a moment I saw the faint glimmer of apology there, like a candle struggling against the wind. Before I could speak, Aunt Grace rose from her chair. She'd been quiet until now, sitting in the corner as though merely observing. But her voice, calm and deliberate, carried more weight than any gavel. "This family has a duty to honor Michael's real wishes," she said, "and those wishes include Olivia. Cutting her out would be a violation, not just of the law, but of blood." The room fell silent. My chest tightened with relief at her words, though I forced my face to remain composed. Linda's jaw tensed. For the first time, I saw the veneer of charm begin to crack. She turned to me slowly, her eyes narrowing into slits of cold calculation. "Well, then," she said, her voice suddenly sharp, "if you claim to deserve a place, show us. Where's your evidence, Olivia?" The challenge hung in the air like smoke, choking the room with tension. David exhaled softly, his shoulders sagging as though he wanted to vanish. I pressed my palm against the inside of my coat pocket, feeling the edges of the papers I had hidden away, the documents that could unravel Linda's carefully spun web. But showing them too soon could be dangerous. Timing mattered. Proof, in the wrong moment, could be twisted. So I met Linda's gaze, forcing my voice to remain steady. "When the time comes," I said, "you'll see exactly what evidence I have." Her smirk returned, faint but poisonous. "Then I'll be waiting." The room felt heavier than stone, the air charged with battle lines drawn. And in that moment, I realized the war for my father's legacy had shifted into the open. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, a comforting scent that did nothing to calm the tension humming beneath my skin. I sat across from Aunt Grace, who cradled her cup of tea with both hands as though the warmth steadied her. Her eyes, sharp yet kind, searched mine. "I should have said something earlier," she admitted, her voice low enough that the chatter of the cafe swallowed it. "But I was afraid of Linda, and of what it would do to your father." I leaned forward. "You saw her manipulate him, didn't you?" Grace nodded slowly. "Once, years ago, I came by the house without warning. Linda had papers spread across the table. Your father's hand was shaking, but she kept pressing the pen back into his fingers. She was telling him it was for his own good, that it was to simplify matters. I knew it wasn't right. But he waved me off when he saw me, and she smiled. Her words landed like stones in my stomach. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was confirmation. "She's done more than control him emotionally," Grace continued. "She's tried to tie up everything on paper. But there's something she doesn't know I know." I gripped the edge of the table. "What?" Grace glanced around to be sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "Your father's oldest friend, a man named Walter Hayes. He used to manage a property trust with him. Walter mentioned to me once that Linda had asked him about transferring land titles. She wanted to know how to bypass you and David. Walter didn't go along with it, but he overheard enough to realize she was planning something." My breath caught. A lead. Finally, a name. A witness. "Where is he now?" I asked. "He still lives here, a few streets over from the courthouse," Grace said. "He's older now, retired, but he remembers. He was disturbed by what she asked him." I wasted no time. That same afternoon, Grace walked me down the quiet streets until we reached Walter's small brick house. The garden out front was overgrown, ivy climbing the porch rails. Walter himself answered the door, a tall man stooped with age, his eyes clouded but steady. Inside, the living room smelled of dust and pipe tobacco. He listened quietly as I explained why I had come, his lined face unreadable. "I won't lie, Miss Harris," he said finally. "I did hear Linda asking your father about moving land rights. She was persistent. It was years ago, but I remember. I told her it wasn't proper, not without his children's consent. She didn't like that answer." I nodded, heart hammering. "Do you have anything that could prove it?" Walter thought for a moment, then shuffled to a desk in the corner. He rummaged through a drawer and pulled out a battered leather wallet, its edges cracked, the stitching fraying. He held it up, his expression grim. Your father trusted me with this once. Said if anything ever went wrong, I should keep it safe until his children needed it. Inside is a reference to an agreement he never wanted Linda to see. He told me the true contract was hidden elsewhere, but this wallet was the clue. He handed it to me, and my hands trembled as I opened it. The leather creaked like old bones. Inside was a folded scrap of paper, yellowed with age. Written in my father's unmistakable hand were the words, "Do not let Linda touch the land trust." My throat tightened. This was it, a thread leading back to the original contract. But then Walter's eyes darkened. I gave it back to him years ago when he said he'd found a safer place for the real papers. If that contract still exists, it's not here. The realization hit like ice water. The safer place was with Linda now. The wallet, the symbol of my father's last attempt to protect us, was in her possession. As I stepped out into the fading light of the cafe-lined street, the winter air stung my cheeks. My pulse raced with fear and determination, because if Linda held the wallet, then she might already be holding the very contract that could save me or destroy me. The office of the small accounting firm where I worked part-time was usually quiet after hours, just the hum of the heater and the faint smell of old paper files. I had stayed late to close the books for a local client when I noticed something out of place. A black USB drive sat on the corner of my desk, glinting under the fluorescent light. At first, I thought it was mine, but when I picked it up, I saw the faint initials embossed near the edge. L.H. Linda Harris, my stepmother. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen her come in, but then again, Linda was skilled at appearing and disappearing without warning. She must have left it here intentionally, and her smug voice echoed in my mind from our last confrontation. Do you have any real evidence, Olivia? Because without proof, you're just grasping at shadows. Hands trembling, I slid the drive into my computer. The folder inside was neatly labeled, Confidential, Olivia. My heart skipped a beat. Clicking it open, I found a single audio file. I pressed play. The voice was mine, or at least it sounded like mine. Yes, I'll handle the documents. Once my father's gone, the property and the funds will be mine. David won't get a penny. I've already planned it with Belle. The words curdled my stomach. It was me. Unmistakably my tone and inflections, but twisted into a confession of greed. I slammed the spacebar, silencing the recording before it could go further. This is a fake, I whispered aloud, though no one else was there. She spliced it. She manufactured this. But I also knew how dangerous it was. If Linda played this file in front of the family, it would cast doubt on everything I'd said. They'd hear my voice, and even if I screamed forgery, it would sound like desperation. Before I could copy the file, my screen flickered. A message box popped up. Auto purge in progress. The file vanished before my eyes, erased by some timed mechanism embedded in the USB. I yanked the drive out, but it was too late. The evidence of Linda's fabrication had self-destructed. For a moment, I sat paralyzed. She was too clever, too calculating. She hadn't left the USB as a mistake. It was bait. She wanted me to see what she was capable of. And maybe she wanted me to panic. But Linda had underestimated one thing. While the audio played, I had been quick enough to snap screenshots of the playback log, the time, the file name, the metadata window that confirmed when the file had been created. Those images now sat safely in my phone's gallery. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to prove the file once existed. Enough to establish a chain of custody that could turn the tide later. I exhaled slowly, clutching my phone like a lifeline. That's when the notification buzzed. An email from Linda, or rather, from David's family group thread. Christmas Eve, dinner at the estate, full attendance expected. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Linda wouldn't wait much longer. The holiday gathering would be her stage, the place she intended to expose the fabricated audio and bury me under the weight of her lies. But I had seen the trick, and I had saved a trace. This time, she would not be the only one holding the cards. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked up the stone path to my father's farmhouse. Golden lights twinkled in the windows, wreaths hung from the porch railing, and laughter drifted faintly from inside. To anyone else, it was a picture-perfect Christmas Eve. To me, it felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been written. Inside, the family had gathered in the great room. The long table was set with roasted ham, cranberry sauce, and pies that Mom had baked, though the warmth of the food couldn't thaw the tension. Michael sat at the head of the table, frail but determined to play host. David avoided my eyes, his loyalty swinging like a pendulum. Linda, in a deep red dress, looked regal, like a queen who believed she already owned the crown. Dinner had barely begun when Linda stood. She tapped her glass for attention, her smile sharp as the knife by her plate. "Since we are all here, I think it's the right time to clear some matters," she announced. "You deserve the truth about who's truly after Michael's estate." I felt my chest tighten. I knew exactly what she was about to do. From her clutch, she drew another USB drive, identical to the one she had left on my desk. She slid it into a small speaker system she had brought and pressed play. My voice filled the room. "Once my father's gone, the property and funds will be mine. David won't get a penny. I've already arranged everything with Belle." Gasps rippled around the table. Mom's face drained of color. David's jaw dropped. Even Grace's eyes widened, though she darted me a quick glance as if to remind me, "Stay steady." I rose slowly, my palms pressed flat against the table. "That recording," I said, my voice even, though my pulse thundered in my ears, "is a fabrication. It's a fake." Linda's lips curled into a smirk. "Really, Olivia? Will you deny your own voice in front of your father?" Michael's hand trembled as he clutched his glass. His eyes shifted between us, between the daughter he had raised and the wife who now controlled his every move. I pulled out my phone, held it up so everyone could see the screenshots I had captured. This file was engineered. It was designed to self-delete, but I documented the logs before it vanished. The metadata proves it was created just weeks ago on Linda's computer. A murmur spread across the room. Before Linda could retort, Grace stood. "She's right. Olivia deserves time to present full evidence. And I'll stand with her. This isn't justice, it's manipulation." The room fell into silence, heavy and unyielding. Even Bell, who had been so careful to remain neutral, furrowed his brow as he studied the log timestamps on my screen. Michael leaned back in his chair, pale and shaken. His eyes lingered on me, not with full trust yet, but with something softer than doubt. Hesitation, conflict. The silence was unbearable. Then Linda broke it, her tone icy. "Very well. Let her play her games. But when she fails, don't forget who warned you." I lowered my phone, heart still pounding, but steadied by the knowledge that I wasn't alone. Grace slid closer, leaned to my ear, and whispered so only I could hear, "Tomorrow, we bring the original, the real evidence." Her words struck like a flare in the dark. I nodded subtly, determination hardening inside me. The first battle had been survived. The war for truth was just beginning. The first day of the year should have carried joy. Fireworks still lingered in the sky from the night before, and the cold air carried the smell of wood smoke and pine. But in our family, New Year's morning had become a reckoning. My father's farmhouse was crowded, every chair in the great living room filled with relatives who had traveled from near and far. The gathering had been framed as tradition, but we all knew why we were really here. The promise of the original evidence had been whispered through the family grapevine since Christmas Eve. People came with curiosity sharpened like knives, waiting to see if Linda's carefully spun image would hold, or if it would finally shatter. I walked in with Grace by my side, my pulse steady, despite the eyes burning into me. Bell stood near the fireplace, papers tucked under his arm, his expression composed but alert. Linda, Regal in another jewel-toned dress sat close to my father, her hand perched on his like she was both protector and warden. David avoided my gaze, but I noticed his restlessness. The way his foot tapped, the way his eyes darted to Linda, then back to me. He was torn, but today would decide. When Belle called the room to order, silence swept over the relatives. "We are here to clarify matters of the estate," he began, "and to address recent conflicts of trust." Before Linda could seize the moment, I stepped forward. "Last week, you all heard a false recording meant to discredit me. I said then it was fake. Today, I will prove it." Gasps rose as I pulled a small recorder from my bag and pressed play. The sound of Linda's voice filled the room, clear, unmistakable. "As long as Michael signs the papers, Olivia won't have a claim. We'll make sure the codicil disappears. David will come around eventually." The words echoed like a verdict. Every head turned toward her. Linda's face paled, then flushed scarlet. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't pause. From my bag, I pulled a sealed envelope Grace and I had retrieved, the original contract and my father's handwritten notes, the ones I had found in the attic. I placed them in Belle's hands. Belle scanned quickly, then looked up with grave certainty. "This is authentic, and it validates the codicil that names Olivia as co-trustee of the estate." Murmurs spread. A few relatives nodded in satisfaction, others looked away in shame for having believed the lies. My father's hand trembled where it lay under Linda's grip. Linda shot up from her chair, her voice shrill. "This is a setup. That recording, those papers, they could have been forged." But her protest landed flat. The weight of the evidence, the credibility of Belle, and the damning clarity of her own voice hung in the air like a hammer. Then came the shift I had prayed for. David stood. His voice was firm, steady for the first time. "I believe Olivia. I can't keep standing on the wrong side." He walked across the room and placed his hand on my shoulder. The effect was seismic. The room seemed to tilt as the last piece of Linda's foundation crumbled. She looked at David, betrayal etched in her eyes, then at me with a mix of fury and disbelief. My father's shoulders sagged, his lips trembled, and then, to the shock of everyone, tears welled in his eyes. His voice cracked as he looked directly at me. "Olivia, I'm sorry. I should have protected you better." The room fell silent. The kind of silence that carries both grief and relief. The power Linda had wielded so tightly had finally slipped from her grasp. And for the first time, I felt the balance of truth settle firmly in my hands. Morning light spilled gently across the hardwood floors of my own small home. After weeks of storm and tension, the air felt different, lighter, warmer, almost fragile in its quiet. The silence was not oppressive now, but comforting, the kind that comes after a heavy storm has finally passed. I stood in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, watching the steam rise, and let myself breathe deeply. The farmhouse battles, the bitter accusations, the cold stares, all of it had finally folded into the past. My father arrived first, leaning on his cane, with Grace close behind to steady him. David followed soon after, his steps slower than usual, eyes lowered as if he carried a weight of shame. For a moment, none of us spoke. The room was filled only with the soft clink of cups as I poured coffee for each of them. It was ordinary, simple, but it felt sacred after everything we had survived. My father's voice was low when it finally came. "Olivia," he said, "I was wrong. I should never have allowed Linda to hold so much power over me, or over us." His eyes glistened with something fragile, something like regret. "She's gone now. She left the house last night without a word, and maybe it's better that way." I nodded, absorbing his confession. Part of me longed to forgive fully, to pretend none of it had happened. But another part, the part that had fought tooth and nail to hold the truth, knew that forgiveness had to come with conditions. "Dad," I answered gently but firmly, "I can forgive, but not without boundaries. Like love without respect is just weakness. If I am to stay, my voice must matter. My name must stay on every paper, every agreement." David looked up at me then, his eyes heavy. I was a coward, he admitted. I let Linda's poison sway me. I won't make that mistake again. His hand rested on the table, open, waiting for me to accept. After a moment's pause, I placed mine over his, not out of absolution, but recognition that healing had to begin somewhere. Grace, ever the quiet pillar, smiled faintly. It takes more strength to rebuild than to destroy, she said softly. You've proven that, Olivia. The climax of this journey wasn't in crushing Linda. It was here, in this room, with my family fractured yet willing to piece itself back together. I wasn't naive, scars would remain. But I had claimed my space, my right, my role. Belle had formalized it the night before. I was now co-manager of the estate, equal in every decision, shielded by law and by truth. Later, when everyone left, I returned to my study. I opened the desk drawer and placed the documents inside. The will, the codicil, even the original contract. The DNA reports, the logs, the recordings, all carefully stacked. I closed the drawer, turned the key, and let the lock click into place. The sound was soft, but it carried the weight of finality. I leaned back, listening to the faint hum of the house. No cliffhanger. No more battles lurking in shadows. Only the quiet satisfaction that justice had been done and that I had drawn a line no one could cross again. The papers would rest, untouched, as a reminder that peace is born not from surrender, but from the courage to set boundaries. For the first time in months, I smiled into the morning, knowing the fight was over. The dinner table held only a few simple dishes, yet the taste brought me back to childhood, when the whole family used to sit together. I realized that love doesn't mean swallowing all the bitterness, but keeping enough boundaries so both sides can still breathe. Those who keep their word deserve to be kept close, and those who cross the line must let the law teach them where to stop. Filial piety without respect will sooner or later turn into chains. Outside, the breeze carried the scent of freshly cut rice, drifting in with a quiet sense of peace. If this story touched you, please like, share, and leave a comment. Type 1 if you resonate, type 2 if you think there's room for improvement.